Before I delve deep into A Song of Ice and Fire, let me begin by briefly talking about Elden Ring, a fantasy game written by George R. R. Martin, which I believe to hold fundamental clues for us to understand the universe of the book series. In Elden Ring, the universe was once a being known as the One Great. Its mind, which is personified by an entity known as the Greater Will, caused it to shatter, creating the universe as we know it. This event serves as a parallel to the Big Bang. The One Great was divided into two entities, that of ice and night, and that of fire and day. As life sprouted in various planets, the Greater Will, which remained a separate entity, orchestrated a plan to extract their life energy, a way of nurturing the now fractured One Great. It sent falling stars bearing envoys to the planets it targeted. These envoys would grant intelligence to the native creatures so that they would be capable of serving the outer gods, which are aspects of the dualistic entities, and the Greater Will, shaping their culture around their worship. The plan would culminate in the native creatures cultivating a divine tree, which would serve as a beacon for soul absorption, and producing a god, a messianic figure who would wage wars to form a great empire centered around the tree. Of course, the deaths and blood sacrifices and funerary rituals involved ultimately served as offerings to the fractured One Great. The One Great parallels the Gnostic Demiurge, a flawed creator god who harvests the life energy of the living. The main character of Elden Ring's narrative is Marika, the man-made god who ruled the lands between. She'd later devise a counterplan to purge the Greater Will and its influence from the lands between. The plan aimed to bring forth an age of men, who'd rule as sovereigns, and not as puppets of external forces. Now, I'll talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. My opening argument may feel strange at first, as it centers around something that was said in the TV show, but please bear with me as I explain my reasoning, and I assure you it will make sense. In the first season of the show, Rob mentions that the old Nan of Winterfell says that the world is the eye of a giant named Macumber.
What are you telling him now?
Only what the little lord wants to hear.
Get your supper, I want some time with him. One time she told me, the sky is blue because we live inside the eye of a blue-eyed giant named Macumber.
Maybe we do.
The Old Nan is a character whose role is to inform the reader, or the viewing audience, in this case, of the lore of the world of Ice and Fire. All of the stories she told were proven true, despite them seeming absurd to the characters around her. The creation myth of Macumber is mentioned in Season 1, Episode 3, and Season 4, Episode 3, both of which are episodes credited with George's writing.
Are you interrogating me, Lord Tywin?
Some believe the king choked.
Some believe the sky is blue because we live inside the eye of a blue-eyed giant.
I believe it wasn't a random inclusion by the writers of the show, but a hint by George as to the nature of the cosmology of A Song of Ice and Fire. There are hints that Macumber is a real thing in the books as well, despite the story not being mentioned directly. For example, I think the story is what inspired the name of the Lake of Westeros, God's Eye, and to be the reason for the Red Comet to be described as a scratch across the face of God in A Clash of Kings. And I think it's entirely possible that we'll get more clues in later installments of the series, if not a first-hand mention of Macumber. The universe of A Song of Ice and Fire is quite similar to the universe of Elden Ring. The main narrative of Ice and Fire too mirrors that of Elden Ring in many relevant ways. There are two real gods in Ice and Fire. These gods share an important role in the plot, which proves their existence. There's the outer god of ice and night, the moon, also known as the Great Other, and as the drowned god worshipped by the Iron Islanders. This god is the force responsible for the Weirwood trees, the Others, and the Krakens. The Great Other is the source of warg powers. And there's the outer god of fire and day, the sun, commonly known as Helior, and as the storm god feared by the Iron Islanders. This god is the force that created and that guides the dragons, as well as the source of the dark magic that revived Beric Dondarrion and Catelyn Stark. Helior is the source of dragon riding powers. They are the only sources of resurrection in the series, the only sources of magic in general. They operate similarly to the outer gods of Elden Ring. Their role is to extract the life energy of living creatures, which is why they incite wars, division, and often demand rituals of sacrifice. They are the driving force behind most of the major wars and natural catastrophes of the world of ice and fire. Their rivalry may be part of a greater plan by the Demiurge, that is, by Macumber, to maximize soul extraction of the living. But there are men who are aware of this cosmic ploy. The Andals orchestrated a great conspiracy to get rid of the influence of the outer gods and give rise to a proto-atheistic world society. They have created the Faith of the Seven, a religion that preaches not the worship of the outer gods, but of humanity itself. As the Andals conquered Westeros, the Faith of the Seven supplanted the religions of its inhabitants. The Hightowers, one of the oldest noble houses, whose motto is "We light the way," collaborated with the Andals in their quest. They are behind the Order of the Maesters and the founding of Old Town, and have helped spread the Faith of the Seven. The Hightowers were among the first Westerosi lords to welcome the Andals, and Lord Daemon Hightower was the first to accept their faith. The system of the Maesters is an ingenious tool of control. Most aspiring scholars, healers, messengers, and scientists of the Seven Kingdoms dream of studying at the Citadel. They receive a biased education and go on to be employed by nearly every relevant noble house of Westeros. The Maesters have become an integral part of the education of noble children, and many of them act as advisors to nobility as well. The Maesters obfuscate tales of old, which often contain dangerous truths about the world, and they try their hardest to discredit magic, despite most of them knowing it exists. It implies that the Maesters who go against the conspiratorial agenda are shunned and even murdered. For a concrete example, Aemon Targaryen was more than qualified to have been raised to Archmaester, yet he was sent to the wall. As stated in the story, the reason why is his Targaryen blood. The Maesters are also in charge of writing history, and it is believed in universe by many that their history books display an Andal-centric vision. To conclude this segment, I'll show you a clip of George talking about the Gnostic Cathars, which according to him were the main source of inspiration for the religion of the Lord of Light.
Again, I don't try to do direct things from history, but I'm certainly inspired by a lot of real history. And the religion of the Lord of Light is based in part on a couple of the dualist religions that actually existed in our world. The Cathars were the Albigensians who were destroyed. They were Christian heresy. The Cathars were a very strange heresy that make fascinating reading because they were true dualists. I mean, Christianity has this concept of God and the devil, but the devil is definitely, second place. He's not the equal to God. He's a loser, and God permits him to do little things, but in the end, there's no doubt who's gonna come out. The Albigensians, it was a real dualist system where they thought there's a dark God and there's a God of light. There's a God of good and a God of evil, and they're at perpetual war, and they're equal, and we don't know who's going to win.
However, in the story he wrote, I don't believe there is a god that is exclusively good and one that is exclusively bad. Both the good and the bad of the universe derive from the same source, that being Macumber. I believe George has written various clues about the origin of the others, and that it is already possible to understand what they are. The first and most important clue has to do with resurrection magic. In a display of as above, so below, a resurrection acts as a microcosmic display of the intentions of the outer gods. For example, it heavily implies that when a priest of Helior resurrects the dead, a chunk of their soul, which is responsible for one's memories, elucidation, and humanity in general, is lost and replaced with an element respective to Helior, fire. The kiss of fire is what triggers the resurrection. The others are said to be so cold as to affect the temperature around them. They are described as having cold blue eyes that are as bright as blue stars, similarly to Melisandre, whose eyes are of an unsettling red. Interestingly, Melisandre does not feel the need to eat for prolonged periods of time. It's as though she's being sustained by the essence of Helior that is within her. The others are also described by the old Nan as dead things, and while they are not entirely dead, as they're animated, they are also not entirely alive either. I'd wager that they too have no need for eating and drinking. The old Nan also says that they hate every creature with hot blood in its veins. Stannis calls them demons made of ice and snow and cold. Melisandre believes that they are the cold children of the Great Order. We know that they're capable of resurrecting dead men and creatures. Only burning the bodies of the deceased can prevent them from being revived by the others. Craster was intentionally producing male offspring to offer to the others, whom he calls the gods. According to the stories of the old Nan, the free folk give the woman they steal from the Seven Kingdoms to the others, and they laid with the others during the long nights to birth half-human children. If we place the others into the bigger picture, it's easy to see that they may be resurrected, soulless men, whose souls were taken by the Great Order, and who act on behalf of their outer god as vassals, or pseudo-apostles, so to speak. The books heavily imply that the others had made a deal with the Northerners, which involved human offerings. This ancient pact may be the reason why the bastards of the North are named Snow. As one's soul is lost in the process of resurrection, they gradually develop a thirst for souls, which is why Lady Stoneheart, as an example, acts in a way that is out of character for Caitlyn, urging for excessive bloodshed. Evidently, her drastic change in personality is also a result of her trauma and appetite for revenge. But I think it is strongly hinted that there is more to Lady Stoneheart's behavior than that. It is also hinted that the others have a connection to the Weirwood trees, which makes sense, as the Weirwood trees are related to the Great Order. They appear to be frozen in time and act as instruments for the wargs to navigate the timeline. It strongly implies that the Weirwood trees, or, more broadly, all Heartswood trees, are a product of sacrifice. They are vessels for wargs because they are fertilized with the hearts of men or of children of the forest. The Ironborn believe that the demon tree Ygg, which I think is a metaphor of a Weirwood tree, had pale wood and fed on human flesh. Human faces are carved on the trees, and the books seldom describe how they seem to weep with sap, their metaphorical tears and blood. This is especially significant, as the others seem to be excellent wargs themselves. The Northerner belief that their gods watch them through the Weirwood trees is based on a bizarre truth. Indeed, the children of the forest watch them through the trees, to check if they are lying to them, or if they are truthful in their promises, if they are enacting their rituals as they should. The Weirwood trees are akin to tools of mass surveillance for the children of the forest, who were most likely the first worshippers of the Great Order. The faith of the old gods seems to derive from both the worship of the Great Order, who is venerated and feared as a god of death, and the worship of the spirits of nature, especially those of the green seers who eternally dwell in the Weirwood trees. As is often the case with religion, the core beliefs of this faith were diluted over time, and the present-day Northerners know barely anything about it. By analyzing the numerous clues about the nature of Azor Ahai that are scattered throughout the series, I believe we can clearly understand who was and what is the Azor Ahai. Azor Ahai is first and foremost an archetype, a role enacted by someone. The role is that of a false messiah, an antichrist who will bring war and suffering to feed the Demiurge. In order to become Azor Ahai, one must sacrifice a loved one, a woman who represents the moon, by piercing her with the sword that will become the Lightbringer, a name that translates to Lucifer or Morning Star in Latin. It's likely that before this step of the ritual, the one who will become Azor Ahai must have gone through death and rebirth, losing a part of his soul in the process. The first to become Azor Ahai was a figure known as the Bloodstone Emperor. Upon becoming Azor Ahai, the Emperor began a reign of terror. He practiced dark arts, torture, and necromancy, enslaved his people, and feasted on human flesh. He brought forth the Long Night, an age of eclipse, unleashing evil on earth. The Lion of Night, who came to punish the wickedness of man, is an allegory to the eclipsed sun, and the Maiden Maid of Light, who turned her back upon the world, is an allegory to the dark moon of the eclipse. I believe that the Azor Ahai had purple eyes and platinum white hair. The purple color of the iris representing the union of ice and fire. Blue and red mixed together makes purple. Eyes are the windows to the soul. The purple eyes of the Azor Ahai hint that he was the envoy of both outer gods, the supreme servant of Macumber. Both the others and the dragons were subservient to him. The eclipse is of course symbolic of this dual communion as well. The King's Guards were likely invented as a nod to the others who served Azor Ahai as his royal guard. The writing of the books makes a clear parallel between them. In fact, there are various passages that describe both the others and the King's Guard with the exact same wording. This is why the members of the King's Guard serve for life, despite the detriments that come from old age. It represents the immortality of the others. The meeting table of the King's Guard in the Red Keep is made of white weirwood. Even after the fall of his empire, the bloodline of the Azor Ahai persisted and preserved his genes through the ages. His descendants often had to resort to incestuous marriages to do so, which is why the Faith of the Seven condemns such practices. To be specific, I believe that the genes of the Targaryens weren't sufficiently pure for them to be capable of both dragon riding and warging. Brynden Rivers, the Blood Raven, seems to be an exception, as he is the offspring of a Targaryen and a Blackwood. In the present day, I believe that Jon Snow is the one destined to become Azor Ahai. Daenerys, who is extensively linked to Azor Ahai symbolism as well, is a red herring. She is, in fact, a stand-in for Nissa Nissa, the woman who will be sacrificed in the ritual. As you probably inferred from this video, I fully stand by the theory that Jon Snow is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, their union being yet another symbol of the merging of ice and fire. Jon Snow being mistreated for being a bastard when, in truth, his blood is the most powerful of all is a masterful example of dramatic irony. I will not talk about this theory in this video, as it is quite popular already. Jon Snow may not seem like someone who'd become the Azor Ahai at first, as he's an honorable, fair, and kind man. However, I believe him to already be walking on a path of corruption. Since becoming the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, he has been forced to make hard decisions that had a major impact on his personality. He has already murdered Ygritte in a way that could serve as foreshadowing for the eventual murder of Daenerys. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, he was stabbed and seemingly murdered. As previously explained, resurrection comes with a cost, the loss of one's soul. I'd even argue that the original Bloodstone Emperor was possibly a fair man like Jon, who died, resuscitated, and his journey culminated in him turning to evil. The previous Azor Ahai was from Essos. Jon Snow is fated to bring forth the eclipse from Westeros, and history may repeat itself. Jon Snow's character arc seems to mirror that of the protagonist of the Dune series, Paul Atreides, who was, at first, a fair and kind young man, and was gradually corrupted. Both are archetypal antichrists and share various similarities between them, which I will not talk about in this video. The Valyrians appear to have had their own religion. Some of the supposed gods they worshipped were named Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar. However, I propose that the gods worshipped by the Valyrians were dragons themselves, who are, in turn, creatures of Heliar. So by extension, the pre-conversion faith of the Targaryens is likely a variation of Heliar worship. This ties amazingly with the naming of the dragons of the Targaryens. They traditionally get their names from Valyrian gods. This practice mirrors the naming scheme of human kings, which often inherits the names of their predecessors. The religion of the Targaryens, being originally a variation of Heliar worship, also beautifully ties with the North worshipping the Great Order. And the Azor Ahai, whose arrival to Westeros has been foreshadowed, would act as the unifying force of ice and fire, of North and South. The East and West also seem to exhibit this duality. The Iron Islands are tied to the Drowned God, which is a facet of the Great Order, and the Stormlands are tied to the Storm God, which is a facet of Heliar. It is also worth noting that the south of Westeros is a desert, while the north is a frigid land. To conclude the video, I'll share 3 predictions I have regarding the conclusion of the book series. Firstly, I believe that Shireen will be sacrificed to resurrect Jon Snow by Melisandre. This event will serve as a parallel of the situation with Edric Storm. Stannis was in favor of sacrificing an innocent life for what he perceives to be the greater good of the realm. In a conversation with Davos, he asked, "What is the life of one bastard boy against a kingdom?" To which Davos replied, "Everything." Shireen, who is heir to Stannis, will be sacrificed to resurrect Jon Snow, a bastard boy that is fated to become Azor Ahai. Secondly, I believe that Stannis, who is the embodiment of duty, will ultimately be tasked with self-sacrifice. He will learn that he is not the Azor Ahai, that Melisandre was mistaken in her judgment. His arc will end with him willingly fulfilling his final duty, as he always does, and he will die in accordance with his morals. And lastly, I believe that Arya will be the one to slay Jon Snow. Her character arc will culminate in the assassination of her beloved half-brother, who was corrupted by evil. Her last target will be the one who gently pushed her toward her path as an assassin by gifting her a sword. And it will likely be that very weapon, the needle, that will be used by Arya to end her half-brother's life.